The abs, buns, and thighs lady from the 1990s apparently has a regular standing gig on Fox News where she made the audacious and completely false statement that by 1860, 98% of people were not slave owners in the United States, and therefore we must be overblowing slavery and then the civil rights actions that came afterwards in order to attempt to rectify some of those injustices. But of course, like all MAGA math, she's dead wrong, absolutely. And she's using very misleading and erroneously calculated numbers. So let's go through the actual numbers. First of all, the entire American population in 1860 was about 31 million people. Now, slavery had already been banned in most of the Union states by 1860, and all the states that would end up seceding from the Union the following year only represented 9 million people of that 31. So in states where slavery was legal, you have to start with 9 million, not 31 million as your denominator. She's also going off of the statistic that was reported in the 1850 census that about 350,000 people owned slaves in the United States. So even if you use the 350, which was in 1850, 10 years before 1860, you still end up with a higher percentage than what Michaels said at 2%. So you can't even count everybody who's in the South because 4 out of those 9 million were slaves. Obviously, they don't count. And women and children were not allowed to own much of anything at that period of time. So you really should be looking at white male adult population to divide that 345,000 out of. So when you do that, you start to get a higher number. And the 1850 census already looked at this percentage of slave owners problem. And it showed, consistent with Michael's 350,000, that about 9.7% of households had slaves. When we look at the 1860 census, which was a decade and about 36% of a population increase later, we see that slave ownership in the Confederate States ranged between 20% to 50%. That is a lot more than 2%, which Julia Michaels falsely claimed in this tweet that she also issued. In Mississippi, where I grew up, slave ownership was half of households, 1 out of 2. And that was the same in South Carolina. The average across the entire South was 20%, so 1 out of 5. So the idea that only 2% of Americans owned slaves in 1860 is a complete fabrication, because the fact is it was only legal in the Confederacy. And within the Confederacy, it ranged between 1 out of 5 and 1 out of 2 households owning slaves. This is another attempt at MAGA to lie and distort statistics the same way they do climate change, vaccines, COVID. I know a thing or two about that, because it's an attempt to diminish the evil stain that it is on history. Because if slave ownership wasn't that bad, then white people aren't as responsible. And the institutions and systems that we've perpetuated through all these years don't need to be dismantled or re-examined, because we're over-exaggerating the role that slavery played in the United States. This is often the lost cause argument, where people say, oh, slavery didn't have anything to do with, the secession. It was about tariffs, or it was about states' rights. When the literal articles of secession, here's the one from Mississippi, the first and primary cause is explicitly stated as withholding slavery. Now, this is not something that should be debatable, but we are living in an age where gravity can be debated as long as there's some jackass on Fox News given a microphone to say that. It is something that we see echo across these current fights over climate science and health science. And it's something that is meant to perpetuate oppressive systems that are, in fact, responsible for the vast majority of the crimes that occur under these systems. I talk about this in a lot more depth on my Substack. You can go to mesoscalenews.com and read it there for free. But this is not a lie that we should let just go out there and spread. Make sure that you're adding community notes every time this is said. Make sure that you're adding sources. I have all the sources underneath my article on Mesoscale. And make sure that we do not allow white people who claim that we make everything about race recenter white victimhood and white fragility in the conversation about slavery and the legacy that it's had on this country.